Hey guys, tonight we're looking at a system Victorian Britain built with truly remarkable thoroughness, a dress code for grief so detailed, so commercially ruthless, and so completely lopsided that it makes modern influencer dress codes look like a light suggestion. Not a personal choice, not a private ritual, a timed, fabric-specific, publicly enforced performance with receipts. If this is your first night with us, the subscribe button is down there somewhere. Press it only, if marvellously bleak historical theatre is the kind of thing that genuinely helps you drift off. Special gratitude to whoever quietly dropped this topic into the comments. Get comfortable, because we're about to spend a significant portion of the next hour wearing scratchy black crepe that cannot be washed without dissolving. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always somehow 2 a.m. somewhere, and at least 3 of you are almost certainly lying in the dark wondering if you'd remember to grieve in the correct fabric. So settle in however you settle in, lights low, pillow arranged to your exact specifications, maybe a little hum of white noise in the background, and please, for your own peace of mind, resist the urge to calculate how many weeks of mourning you'd owe your second cousin. Have you ever wondered what it actually felt like to be handed a rulebook for sorrow, colour-coded, commercially enforced and billed to you before the funeral was over? What if the length of your grief was a matter of public record, and your neighbours were absolutely keeping track? Could you survive 2 years and 3 months in a fabric that faded to rusty brown, smelled faintly of chemicals, ran black streaks down your face in the rain, and could not, under any circumstances, be washed? Did the etiquette manuals really count out the weeks for a cousin? The weeks? How did an 18-year-old accidentally invent a colour in his home laboratory that slipped directly into the mourning wardrobe, and who decided that was appropriate? And what, exactly, was being delivered to a dead man's rooms every morning for 40 years? Congratulations. You've just woken up in London, December 1861, and the Queen is already in black. The papers arrived before breakfast. The shop windows on Regent Street are going dark, one by one, bolts of black cloth unfurling behind the glass like something that was always waiting for this exact moment. Good luck. You wake up on the morning after your husband dies, and before you have finished registering that he is gone, your sister-in-law is already in the doorway asking what you are going to wear. The question is not callous. It is the first appointment on a calendar you did not know you had been keeping. There is a system, and the system begins now, before breakfast. You sit up. You think about colour. The answer is already chosen for you, and it will be the answer for somewhere between 12 months and the rest of your life. The colour is black. Not dark navy, not charcoal, not the deep greenish black of your winter coat that you've always liked. Black. Flat, total, light-absorbing black. And specifically, it must be the right kind of black, on the right kind of fabric, or the neighbours will notice. The fabric is called parramatta, a silk and cotton blend that has the particular quality of refusing to reflect anything back at you. Over it goes crepe. Crepe is a crimped silk, dull, matte, and faintly stiff to the touch, with a faintly chemical, dusty smell that, once you have associated it with loss, you will not be able to disassociate from it for the rest of your life. It smells, in a word, like this. Like right now. Like the morning after. Let's talk about the crepe for a moment, because the crepe behaves like fabric that cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be washed. Washing destroys the crimp, and the crimp is the entire point. Left in sunlight or humidity, it fades from black to a rusty, embarrassing brown that everyone can see from across the street. This means you don't own crepe so much as you rent it from the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is not a reliable landlord. The solution is to keep buying more. Courtaulds of Halstead, Essex, have anticipated your need. By the 1860s, they are producing approximately 65,000 yards of crepe per week from their factory, which is roughly enough to wrap your grief around the entire county of Suffolk and still have some left over for Kent. Courtaulds crepe. It is not a generic. It is a brand name, the way Hoover became a verb, except the product is bereavement. Your sister-in-law, whose name is Mrs. Edith Farrow, and who has buried a husband of her own, stands in the doorway holding a card for Jay's London General Mourning Warehouse on Regent Street. Jay's can outfit an entire bereaved family within a few hours. This is not a boast. It is a logistical promise, and they keep it. Jay's stocks standard-size black garments in every cut, keeps seamstresses on the premises, and has trained its staff to speak quietly and offer refreshments while the alterations are made. You will sit in a cushioned chair in a room carpeted so thickly you cannot hear your own footsteps, and a woman whose name you will not catch will take up the hem of a dress you did not choose while you cry, and she will not mention the crying, and neither will you. It is, in its way, the most efficient grief has ever been administered. The complete outfit, dress, bonnet, veil, gloves, mantle, costs somewhere between £15 and £30. A skilled factory worker earns perhaps £75 in an entire year. You are not thinking about this right now, Mrs. Farrow is already at the door, holding the card from Jay's between two fingers with the flat, patient, faintly clerical air of someone delivering a summons. The carriage is being called, Mrs. Farrow steps into the hall to fetch your shawl. The card sits on the dresser where she left it, black bordered, slightly warm from her glove. You have not yet put your feet on the floor. You go to Regent Street because Jay's is where one goes. The carriage takes you and a chaperone, usually a sister or aunt, because you are not meant to do this alone and you are not meant to be seen wearing yesterday's colours longer than absolutely necessary. The shop window is solid black from glass to skirting. The door opens before you reach it. A man in a dark coat steps aside without making eye contact, because making eye contact would be a small failure of the establishment's house style. Inside, the carpet is thick enough to swallow sound. The voices of the staff are hushed, careful, and precisely calibrated, not a whisper, not a conversational register, something in between that the shop has clearly rehearsed. The smell is wool and black dye and something faintly chemical underneath, which is the crepe, which you will come to associate with this period of your life in the same involuntary way you associate certain songs with certain years. There are no bright surfaces. The mirrors are framed in ebony. Even the light seems to be doing its best. Let's talk about what Jay's actually sells. Not just fabric. Jay's sells correctness. You will leave outfitted to the precise specification of your loss, measured and verified, so that no one who passes you on the street can find a thread out of order. A woman named Mrs. Alcott, floor supervisor, black silk, extremely correct posture, approaches your chaperone first, then you, in that order, which tells you everything about how this transaction is going to feel. She speaks to you about fabric weights and sleeve lengths with the focused sympathy of a very experienced professional. She does not call what you are doing shopping. She guides you toward the deep mourning section as though leading you gently down a hallway you've already decided to walk. This is where the seamstress comes in. She's at the back, near a curtained alcove, and she does not introduce herself. She has pins in a cushion on her wrist and a measuring tape around her neck, and the focused expression of someone who has fitted many women in exactly this state. She adjusts a hem while you stand very still. You are crying a little. She doesn't mention it. The hem gets finished. The silence is professional and not unkind. The garments themselves are parramatta for daytime. That flat, light-absorbing silk and cotton blend that refuses to catch the light under any circumstances, and everything is trimmed in crepe. You know about the crepe now. It has to be replaced regularly, which is something Jay's is positioned to assist you with at your earliest inconvenience. The fabric is also slightly scratchy at the collar. It refuses to lie flat against your skin. Your chaperone, your Aunt Margaret, sits in a chair near the window and says very little. She lost her husband in 1857, and she knows how this part goes. She watches the seamstress work with the air of someone who has graduated from a curriculum and is attending a younger student's examination. She picks up a small card from the side table, reads it, puts it down. The card is a schedule of mourning periods by relation printed on heavy stock, a full ledger of who is owed how many months. It reads like a TurboTax worksheet, except the deductions are dead aunts. You leave Jay's carrying parcels. The man in the dark coat holds the door. The carriage is waiting. Your chaperone says the hem sits nicely. The total is what it is, and the system has arranged things so that you pay it without quite registering what you've paid, in the same way a dentist arranges the chair so you don't see the tools until they're already in your mouth. The street outside is ordinary and loud and moving in every direction. You sit in the carriage with the parcels and the smell of crepe, which is already starting to seem familiar. You stand on a low wooden platform in a back room at Jay's, while two seamstresses circle you with a tape measure and a pincushion. One of them has a small cloth folded into her apron pocket, which she hands you without looking up when you start crying again. You are being measured for a dress you cannot picture. You are being measured for the next 2 years and 3 months of your life. The tape goes around your waist. The tape goes around your bust. Someone writes down the number. The seamstress nearest to you is named Doris. She moves with the brisk efficiency of someone who has done this every day for years, which she has. She doesn't comment on the crying. She doesn't pause. She pins a fold of black parramatta against your shoulder, holds it there with 2 fingers, and tilts her head at it the way a surgeon might assess an incision. There is a problem with the shoulder seam. She does not share it with you. She murmurs to the other seamstress, in a low voice, in terms you don't understand. Let's talk about what they're building around you. The first layer is the dress itself, parramatta, which is a silk and cotton weave designed to absorb light rather than reflect it. There is no sheen. There is no softness. It lies flat against the body like something that has already given up. Over the parramatta goes the crepe trim, which has a texture roughly equivalent to a very expensive kitchen scourer, crimped, ridged, and stiff under the fingertip. Doris runs her thumbnail along one ridge to check the set of it, the way you might test the tooth of a comb. It catches. It is meant to catch. The whole grim point of the stuff is that it never quite lies down and never quite forgives. Doris's partner, a younger woman whose name you don't catch, holds a length of crepe against your sleeve, and they both look at it for a moment with the grave deliberation of people deciding something important. It is important. The width of the crepe trim signals where you are in the mourning schedule. Wide at the wrist means deep mourning. You are in deep mourning. The trim will narrow over time, month by month, like a tide going out very slowly and wearing all black while it does. The cost of all this arrives in your mind somewhere between the second measurement and the third. You saw the price cards in the front room. You are being fitted for the equivalent of several months of someone else's wages while you stand on a wooden platform and accept a stranger's handkerchief and try not to make a sound. Jays has extended this service in a spirit of compassion. The compassion is priced accordingly. The veil is discussed. A full crepe veil for deep mourning hangs from the bonnet and falls to the hem. You will wear it outdoors. You will wear it in carriages. You will wear it at church, where it will sit between your face and the world for the better part of the next year, like a very expensive net curtain installed specifically around your grief. The bolt of it leans against the wall by the alcove, half unrolled, and a fine black grit has sifted onto the floorboards beneath where it has been handled. One of the seamstresses sweeps it aside with the edge of her shoe without breaking conversation. You will come to associate the stuff with nothing good. Doris steps back and looks at the full silhouette. She nods once. She does not say it's right. She says nothing is needing to be let out. This is, apparently, sufficient. You return to the front of the shop, where a man with a small ledger is waiting to total the order. The list is longer than you expected. There is the deep mourning dress, the second stage dress, the half-mourning grey, the crepe trimming, the bonnet, the veil, the gloves, the handkerchiefs with black borders, the petticoats, the parasol, and the cap. The number at the bottom of the page is an entire year of a skilled factory worker's wages. You sign for it. You do not look at the figure twice. The man with the ledger has the specific talent of making an enormous sum feel like a minor administrative detail. He recites the items without inflection. He does not pause at the total. He simply holds the page slightly toward you, tilts his head, and waits. The pen is already uncapped. This is not a sales technique. It is a climate. Let's talk about what you've just purchased. The deep mourning dress alone accounts for the crepe trimming sold by the yard. The crepe moves from Courtaulds looms to Regent Street and onto your hem without ever needing to hurry, because there is always more grief arriving to meet it. It is a material that announces your condition before you've said a word. The handkerchiefs are itemized separately. There are 6. They have black borders 1 inch wide, which is correct for deep mourning. A narrower border would read as careless. A wider border does not exist on the menu because the menu is also the rule book. Susan, the shop attendant who has been quietly shadowing you since the fitting room, sets the wrapped handkerchiefs on the counter with 2 hands, the way someone might handle a document that has already been signed by someone important. Now, the parasol. It's black. It does not protect you from sun so much as it extends the silhouette of mourning upward and outward, adding a kind of architectural finality to the ensemble. The parasol is what you carry when you are not inside. Inside, you carry the veil. There is always something to carry. Your husband's brother, somewhere across town in a similar coat, is at this moment buying a single black armband and a hatband called a weeper, named, with the unself-conscious confidence of the Victorian etiquette system, after the thing it doesn't really require him to do. His total mourning obligation runs to approximately 3 months. He is not expected to replace his wardrobe. He is not standing at a counter signing for 6 handkerchiefs with correctly measured borders. He is at work, most likely, in a coat with a narrow, tidy and entirely removable band of black at the sleeve, which will come off in 12 weeks and never be mentioned again. You will be in this dress, and then the next dress, and then the grey, for 2 years and 3 months, minimum. The bill includes a line for replacement crape. This is not unusual. The stuff wears out and must be renewed, so the ledger already anticipates your return. The crape is a consumable. Edwina, the woman behind the wrapping counter, ties each parcel with black ribbon and stacks them with a practiced efficiency that suggests she has done this particular sequence several hundred times. She does not make eye contact while she ties. The bow is neat. The ribbon is the correct width. She slides the stack toward you without ceremony, which is its own kind of ceremony. The etiquette manuals miss us. Beatons and manners and rules of good society have already calculated what happens if you fall short. The press notices, the neighbours notice, the column inches are there, waiting, and they would not be kind. You pick up the parcels. They are heavier than you expected, which is also correct. You put on the deep mourning dress for the first time 3 days after the funeral. The parramatta has a flat, light-absorbing texture against your skin, and the crepe trimming at the cuffs, hem, and bodice has its own colder, rougher feel. Your maid has to help you with the back fastenings because the bodice is rigid where the crepe has been layered 3 deep. You stand in front of the cheval glass. You see a shape you do not recognize. You have 21 months of this ahead of you, minimum. The crepe has a smell, the one you already know, and within a week you stop noticing it. This is not reassuring. It means the smell is now just the smell of being you, moving through a house, sitting in a chair, reaching across a table for a cup of tea that has gone cold while you are staring at nothing. Let's talk about what the dress actually does to your body. The parramatta is dense. It doesn't move the way a dress moves. It holds its shape with a kind of institutional conviction, like it has its own agenda for where your arms are allowed to go. The crepe at the cuffs sits against your wrists and the texture is not painful, exactly. It's closer to a persistent reminder. You're aware of your wrists in a way you were not before. Every time you reach for something, a letter, a doorknob, a child's hand, the crepe is there first. Summer is coming. You know this because you can feel it in the fabric before you feel it in the air. Parramatta absorbs heat the way a dark stone absorbs heat, steadily and without complaint, and it gives none of it back. A housekeeper named Mrs. Pratt, who has outlasted 3 employers and runs the house on a private set of rules, watches you fan yourself at the breakfast table with a look that is patient, level, and entirely unsurprised, and says nothing. She tips the cream jug a half-inch toward your cup instead. It's the most sympathy available in a 3-foot radius. The crepe doesn't survive a single London summer. By August the shoulders have gone, and no amount of brushing will lift it. So you air it. You brush it gently. You keep it from rain where possible. But humidity moves through the wardrobe like an unpaid guest, and sun finishes what the humidity began. 6 months from now, the change will be plain to everyone and mentioned directly by no one. They won't have to. The dress will announce it for them, and you'll be back at Jay's. And the dye runs in the rain. You have heard what that does to a face on a public street, and you would rather not learn it firsthand. You begin reading clouds the way a sailor reads them, without affection. The jewellery is separate from the dress and arrives in its own small box, lined in a dull grey velvet that has worn shiny at the corners where other fingers have pressed before yours. Jet, because you've done this correctly. Real Whitby jet. The dark fossil stuff dug from the Yorkshire coast and carved into a brooch in a backroom workshop. The air there faintly warm and organic, which is the jet itself, releasing a very mild resin when cut. You pin it at the collar. It's lighter than you expected. The vulcanite pieces in the lower tray are heavier and give off a different smell entirely, faint, rubbery, persistent. The vulcanite is for every day. The jet is for being seen. You look at the cheval glass again. The shape is still unfamiliar. It will be familiar by next week, and that's almost worse. You walk to the chemist on Tuesday morning because the household needs camphor, and because the doctor said fresh air would do you good, you wear the full veil over the bonnet. The veil is a square yard of black crape that hangs from the brim down past your shoulders, and the world through it has a slightly granular quality, like looking at a room through dirty water. People you have known for years cross the street when they see you coming. They are not avoiding you. They are observing the convention. The convention has an architecture. At full mourning, public space reorganizes itself around you. You are not expected to make eye contact through the veil. You are not expected to stop and chat outside the butcher's. You are, for the duration of deep mourning, something closer to a moving monument than a pedestrian, and the street adjusts accordingly. Missus. Aldworth nods once from across the road, a small grave nod that says she has registered your presence and your loss, and has no intention of requiring you to speak. Let's talk about the veil. It is technically a mercy. You are not required to compose your face for strangers, but it also means strangers can see you before you can see them clearly. You are visible at a considerable distance. The square yard of crape announces you before you arrive and marks your departure after you've rounded the corner, which is less privacy than it sounds. A passing child stares. The child's mother pulls him forward without explaining why. The chemist's shop is Mr. Finch on the corner of Albemarle Street, and Mr. Finch knows your family. He comes out from behind the counter. He doesn't say much. He wraps the camphor in paper without being asked, adds a small bottle of lavender water he doesn't charge for, and addresses you as Madam with a particular careful emphasis that means he has thought about this interaction before you arrived. He is, in his way, one of the better prepared people you will encounter today. He hands the parcel across with both hands. Of course, there is an etiquette for receiving condolences in public as well. You incline the head slightly. You don't weep. You don't refuse the gesture. The lavender water goes into your basket, and you thank him quietly, and that is the correct sequence. Getting it wrong, too much emotion, too little, the wrong words in the wrong order, is the kind of thing that gets noted. Not by Mr. Finch, who is decent, but the street has other witnesses. This is where the veil becomes something other than fabric. You can see the faces on the far side of it reading you, patient, careful, and faintly clinical, checking the depth of the black, the quality of the crape, the correctness of the jet at your throat. They are not hostile. They are assessing whether your grief is properly dressed. The two things are not separable in 1862. A woman named Mrs. Crail passes with her daughter. Mrs. Crail lost her husband 4 years prior and has recently entered half mourning. She's wearing grey with a narrow lavender ribbon at the collar that she touches briefly as she passes you, reflexively, the way you might adjust something you're suddenly uncertain about. She nods. You nod. No words. She knows where you are in the calendar. She's done this walk. You buy the camphor. You buy a quantity of black silk thread from the haberdasher 2 doors down, because something is always needing repair. The thread goes in beside the camphor. You don't linger. The fresh air has done its work in the sense that you have breathed some of it. Whether it has done you good is a separate question that the doctor isn't here to answer. You turn back toward the house. The veil swings slightly as you round the corner, and the world stays the same granular, muffled, faintly chemical grey it has been since you left, and you walk home through it. You sit in the parlour with Mrs. Beeton's book of household management open on your lap, and you turn to the chapter on mourning because your husband's mother has just died, and you need to know how many additional months of black this earns you. The book has an index. The index has a sub-entry for in-laws. You run your finger down the column. The pages were printed cheaply and the ink rubs off slightly on your gloves. You count the months and add them to the months you are already counting. The manual specifies 6 months for a mother-in-law. You are already in month 4 of your own sequence. You write the numbers in the margin with a small pencil because the pencil is the only thing in the house that doesn't have an opinion about what you're doing. The system doesn't stack, exactly. It doesn't extend you past your own widowhood period. But it does mean you cannot begin the transition to second mourning when you'd planned. You were planning for March. It's now June, at the earliest. The pencil records this without comment. Let's talk about manners and rules of good society. It's not a book. It's a verdict. By the time it reaches its 35th edition in 1911, it has outlived several of the relatives it requires you to mourn. The relevant table runs to 2 columns. Relation on the left, months on the right. Parent or adult child, 12. Sibling, 6 to 12, depending on closeness. which is helpfully undefined. Grandparent, 6. Aunt or uncle, 3. Cousin, 6 weeks. Distant relative, 2 to 4 weeks, which is the etiquette manual's way of saying it counted them anyway. Even the distant ones, even the ones you'd met twice at Christmas when you were 11. A neighbour named Mrs. Foyle has marked her copy with penciled ticks beside each completed mourning period, the way someone might track chapters in a long novel they aren't enjoying. She's on aunt number 3. There are 2 uncles left. She smooths the page flat each time she opens it, slow, careful, and faintly dutiful, with a practiced gesture of someone consulting a financial ledger that has never once balanced in her favour. Now, the manual does not explain what to do if a second death interrupts the first. It does not have a chapter for that. What it has is a firm silence in the relevant area, which you're meant to interpret as returning to the start. Your own grief, already calendared and penciled and worn on your body, has no grace period for additional grief. The new loss drops into the existing one. The months extend. The crape stays. Mrs. Foyle, across the square, has her copy open at the cousin entry tonight. She has lost a second cousin in Norfolk that she met once briefly in a corridor in 1854. She licks her thumb and turns the page anyway, penciling 6 weeks into the margin in a small, neat, slightly resigned hand. The pencil moves, the fire burns down. Nobody asks whether she remembers the cousin's face. You turn back to your own table. The index is still open at in-laws. Of course, the men's section of the manual is considerably shorter. A widower, 3 months. Black armband, hatband weeper, black gloves, 3 months. Then the armband comes off and the social season resumes, and nobody checks his collar for the correct grade of matte finish. The male mourning chapter fits on a page and a half. The female mourning chapter requires a diagram. You close Mrs. Beaton on the penciled margin note. June at the earliest. The parlour is quiet in the way that rooms are quiet when they contain a person doing arithmetic about loss. The manual goes back on the shelf between the cookery volume and the household accounts register, which is exactly where the Victorians felt it belonged. You keep a small ledger in the writing desk for births and deaths, and you have started keeping a second column beside it for mourning end dates. There is a column for the deceased, a column for the relationship, a column for the start date, and a column for when half mourning ends, and you may, theoretically, wear lavender again. Your sister-in-law's column overlaps with your father's column. Your father's overlaps with your aunt's. You are arithmetic now. You add and subtract dead relatives like accounts payable. The cousin column is the one that offends you most. 6 weeks. You wore 6 weeks of black for a cousin you saw twice a year at Christmas. Once at a funeral that generated its own column, and once at a christening where she spent 40 minutes criticising the sandwiches. 6 weeks of crape, faded slightly at the hem already, for a woman who had opinions about cucumber. You marked the end date in the ledger with a small, quiet line. The overlaps are where the mathematics become personal. Your father died in March. Your aunt, his sister, your aunt, 6 months of mourning, died in October. October is still inside your father's 12 months, so the aunt's 6 months don't start in October. They fold into the existing black, which means they extend past it, which means your father's year carries you to March again, and then the aunt's remaining time carries you to April. And by April you have been wearing black continuously since the previous March, and you have not yet reached the cousin's 6 weeks, which you had mistakenly already counted. Mrs. Foyle, across the street, solved this problem by keeping her ledger in a different colour of ink for each death. Red for her mother, green for her uncle, blue for the cousin. The ink is cheerful. The content is not. She sits at the writing desk with a small ruler and draws the timelines out horizontally, except the deliverable is that you're allowed to wear a lavender ribbon. The ledger is its own kind of grief, but it's also the only thing keeping you out of social trouble. Appear in grey too early and someone notices. A neighbour, a caller, a woman at church who has been watching and counting and keeps her own ledger in her head, because she has always had an extraordinary memory for other people's obligations. She doesn't say anything directly. She mentions how quickly the season is changing. She glances, briefly, at your sleeve. You understand. You go home and check the column again. The distant relative row is the one you circle in pencil and then erase. 2 to 4 weeks. The manual doesn't specify which end of that range applies to you, so you choose 4, because choosing 2 feels optimistic in a way that could be noticed. 4 weeks of a black ribbon pinned to a serviceable dress for someone whose name you had to look up before writing it in the deceased column. The crepe knew him for a month. Mrs. Foyle, the same evening, opens a second ledger she keeps for her elder sister, who is 51 and has been in continuous black since 1849. The sister's columns are silent, neat and unbroken. Parent, parent, brother, husband, aunt, aunt, cousin, cousin. A tidy stack of overlapping bars that never quite let go. Fashion historian Lou Taylor would later find records of Victorian women who spent 7 or more consecutive years in mourning by their 40s, not because their lives were unusually tragic, but because the accounting was structured that way. Mrs. Foyle's sister is in year 13. She wears the same lavender ribbon every evening because it has been the only colour available to her for over a decade. You look at the second column, the end dates. Your aunt's line closes in April. There is a small blank space after April, maybe 6 weeks, before a distant relations obligation begins in the summer, which you had almost forgotten about. 6 weeks of ordinary clothes. You put a small star next to it in the ledger, not to celebrate, just to remember where it is. You are walking back from Aunt Margaret's house when the rain begins, and within 4 minutes the crepe has begun to do what crepe does in rain. The black dye is not fast, it runs. You can feel a damp coldness against your collarbone and a slow line working its way down your throat. By the time you reach your own door, your neck has a dark grey streak from jaw to lace, and your white handkerchief, when you touch it to your skin, comes away the colour of cold tea. This is not a new problem. Everyone in black knows the rain problem. The dye that Courtaulds locks into the crepe is not especially interested in staying where it was put. Humidity loosens it. Sunlight fades it. A warm afternoon turns the deep, satisfying flat black of deep mourning into something closer to an old bruise. A brownish, greenish, apologetic shade that sits between grief and neglect. So the dye goes where it goes. Your skin gets the rest. The neck takes the worst of it. The crepe collar sits directly against your skin. There is no comfortable distance between the fabric and your throat, and the texture of crimped mourning crepe against a jaw is something like being slowly embraced by a very committed hairbrush. It is scratchy in the passive, patient, institutional way of something that has decided this is simply how things are and sees no reason to apologize. Your gloves hold dye too. Your wrists, by the end of a damp afternoon, have the faint grey cast of someone who has been illustrating by hand for several days. A seamstress at Jay's on Regent Street, her name is Ellen. She has been here since the warehouse opened its doors, and she holds pins in her mouth the way other people hold strong opinions, will tell you, if you bring the collar in, that it can be pressed back into presentable shape for a small additional charge. She says this with the warmth of someone who knows you are going to say yes. You are going to say yes. The collar is not going to fix itself, and you cannot go about with a grey neck. Not in the second month. Not with the Harrington sisters watching. The other thing rain does is make the fabric heavy. Crepe dry is substantial. Crepe wet is a punishment. Your skirt, already a considerable architectural project even before the weather got involved, gains perhaps 2 pounds of water in a moderate shower and clings to your ankles with the determined loyalty of something that has made a decision about you. By the end of the walk home, you are warm from the inside and cold from the outside, and the wet fabric has a smell that is not grief exactly, but which will become, in your memory, inseparable from it. The dress itself cannot simply be hung by the fire. Heat sets the dye into a hard shine that ruins the matte finish, so it goes over a wooden airing rail in the back passage where the air is cool and the light is poor, and there it drips into a folded cloth on the floor for 2 days. The housemaid moves around it the way you move around something convalescent, quiet, watchful, and faintly wary, turning it once an hour so the damp does not pool in the gathers. The whole back passage takes on the close, dye-heavy air of a dress recovering from weather. You will need it dry by Thursday, because Thursday is the call to the Pembertons, and there is no second deep mourning dress in the wardrobe yet, only this one and the order you have not yet placed. You go inside. You ring for the basin. You blot the streak from your neck, which takes longer than it should, and you look at the dark water in the bowl afterward the way you have started looking at small practical disasters with a recognition that this is just a Tuesday now, and Tuesdays involve this, and there are quite a few Tuesdays remaining on the ledger. You take the deep mourning dress out of the wardrobe for the 4th time this summer and lay it on the bed under the window, and you see what the light has done to it. The crape at the shoulders has gone from the prescribed dullest possible black to a rusty brown that no one would mistake for mourning. The dress is 6 months old. It cannot be washed. It cannot be re-dyed. It can only be replaced. You write the order to Jays that afternoon. You do not flinch at the figure. The figure is what the figure is, depending on how many yards of trim you need and whether the silhouette has shifted since last season, which it has, because fashion does not pause for grief. You are not thinking about the cost. You are thinking about the shoulders. Courtaulds, while you are thinking about the shoulders, is running the looms. They are stacking bolts in the warehouse. The output is large enough that it stops being a number and becomes a landscape, a flat black landscape, rolling off the machines bolt after bolt, smelling already of the thing it is for. Courtaulds crepe is a trade name. It is also, by the 1860s, basically the only name. A near monopoly on grief fabric. The textile industry has solved for efficiency at the expense of almost everything else. Sunlight degrades it. Humidity degrades it. Rain has already taken its turn, as established at some cost to your collar last Tuesday. So the crepe fades, and you replace it. And somewhere in the factory, a foreman named Mr. Bagshaw signs off another bolt without looking up. A replacement order to Jays is not a difficult transaction. The warehouse was built precisely for this. The repeated purchase, the widow returning, the hem that needs adjusting to match this season's slightly different silhouette. You walk in, state your requirements, and someone measures you with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this many times today. Because she has. Mrs. Adkins, who works the fitting room on Tuesdays and Thursdays and carries her pins in a small tin that clicks when she sets it down, measures your shoulders without commenting on what the summer has done to the old dress. She has a professional relationship with the rusty brown. She has seen it before. She pins the new bodice with 3 small adjustments, quick, certain, and faintly practiced, and does not make eye contact while you are deciding whether to cry, which is its own kind of consideration. Of course, the etiquette manuals have thoughts about replacement frequency, which is to say they have thoughts about everything, including exactly how many weeks of black you owe a cousin you met once at a funeral in 1857. 6 weeks, in case you were wondering. The cousin gets 6 weeks. The manual has a schedule, and the schedule is thorough. It reads like a bill of lading for grief, except the rates are in months and the invoice is your wardrobe. The cost arrives quietly, in small additions to the ledger. A dress for deep mourning, a replacement dress when the crepe fades, another adjustment when your weight shifts under 7 months of heavy, layered, faintly punitive fabric, a new bonnet because the old one browned at the brim. The dress is a consumable good dressed up as a tribute. It wears out on purpose, or close enough to purpose that the distinction stops mattering around the 3rd replacement. You are 6 months into 27. The crepe at Jay's is already cut and waiting. It knows your measurements by now. You are in deep mourning during a London August, which means the dress that absorbs light absorbs heat as well, and you have not been comfortable since June. The fabric is thick. The crepe is thicker. There are 7 petticoats underneath because anything translucent would be a violation. You walk 3 blocks to call on a neighbour and arrive damp at the small of your back, between the shoulder blades and behind your knees. The maid takes your parasol at the door. You sit very still. You ask for water. The crepe is the particular problem. It doesn't breathe. It was never designed to breathe. Breathability was not the design brief. The design brief was matte, light-absorbing, unmistakable from across the street, and sufficiently scratchy that comfort remains conceptually out of reach. It sits against your wrists and your neck and the back of your hands, like a very firm opinion about what you deserve right now, which is not comfort, which is visibility. The dye is the other problem. In dry weather it stays put. In humidity, which August has in abundance, it begins to negotiate. A bead of perspiration at your temple is enough to leave a faint dark glance of black at your collar, which you discover only when your neighbour's expression shifts slightly and she says nothing, because saying something would be worse. You excuse yourself to the basin in the hall. A housemaid named Agnes hands you a cloth with the careful, practiced and faintly weary neutrality of someone who has done this before and intends to do it again. The weight is also real. Jet mourning jewellery runs heavy. A full parure of Whitby jet. The brooch, the earrings, the bracelet, the hair comb adds several pounds across the mourning. Whitby jet has a warm, faintly resinous smell when it's been sitting against warm skin, which is almost pleasant. except that it isn't, because it's attached to everything else. The cheaper alternative, vulcanite, hardened rubber pressed into jet's shape, runs slightly warmer still and gives off a faint rubbery smell by midday, the olfactory equivalent of a very sad bicycle tire. You wear it anyway. French jet, which is black glass, is cooler but heavier. Every option has found a different way to be worse. The manuals do not address August. Miss us. Beaton has nothing to say about what you do when the crepe has stiffened with damp and gone tacky at the seams in the heat which it has, and which everyone in the room can feel without being told. No one mentions it. Mentioning it would require acknowledging that you are a sweating human body inside a system that has not accounted for sweating human bodies. You sit with your hands folded. You accept a second glass of water. The conversation moves to the weather, which is everyone's way of discussing you without discussing you. There is a fly in the room. It lands on the back of your gloved hand, then on your veil, then on the rim of your water glass, and you cannot wave it off with any vigour, because vigour is not what the dress permits. You move your hand an inch. The fly returns. The black wool draws it the way black wool draws everything in August. Heat, light, attention, insects. Your neighbour pretends not to notice the fly. You pretend not to notice the fly. The fly has no notion of decorum and lands on the seed cake. You stay for 40 minutes. You stand to leave and your neighbour notices, briefly, professionally, that the back of your skirt has left a faint, dark impression on her cream-upholstered chair. She says nothing. You say nothing. The maid returns your parasol. You walk the 3 blocks home. Somewhere around the second block your knee starts to itch under the crepe where it's been rubbing since May. You do not scratch it. Scratching is not addressed in the manuals either, but you know how they'd feel about it. You keep walking. The sun is entirely indifferent to your situation. You step into the drawing room of a neighbour for the first time since Albert's funeral, and the room performs a small, involuntary scan of your dress before anyone speaks. The eyes go to the crepe at the cuffs first, to confirm the depth of the trimming, then to the hem to count the rows, then to your hands to confirm the black gloves, then to your bonnet ribbon. The whole thing takes about 3 seconds. The greeting follows, warm and proper, but the audit has already happened, and the verdict has already been filed. Your hostess, Mrs. Lennox, sets a small plate of seed cake on the side table and does not look at your cuffs once for the rest of the visit, which is how you know she has already looked. She has the same Mrs. Beaton you have, on the same shelf, open to the same chapter. She does not need to check twice. She pours the tea with steady, unhurried, professionally cheerful hands and asks after your sister, by name, in a tone calibrated to suggest that nothing about your appearance has registered as a fact. The audit goes wrong, sometimes, and slightly. Not catastrophically wrong, just slightly wrong. A ribbon that's gone a little grey in the sun. A bonnet whose crepe sits a half-inch shallower than the season strictly calls for. A pair of gloves that are almost correct but have the faintest row of stitching at the wrist. The room doesn't react. Nobody reacts. You simply exist in the room with a fact about yourself that everyone has noticed and no one will name. It follows you home. Mrs. Fenwick, a woman of considerable opinion and a very straight spine, sets her teacup down when you enter and does not pick it up again until she has completed the scan. She doesn't rush it. She has the patience of someone who has been conducting informal audits for 30 years and considers accuracy a form of courtesy. Then she smiles, stands, and greets you by name, and the two of you sit down and discuss the weather and the price of coal and whether the new curate has any promise. And the inspection is simply never mentioned, the way a tax assessment is simply never mentioned over dinner, even when everyone at the table is thinking about it. The etiquette manuals are extremely specific about what you should wear and for how long. 6 weeks for a cousin, which raises the question of how, exactly, you are supposed to classify your father's second wife's nephew, a question the manuals approach with the confidence of a flowchart and the warmth of a bracket. The manuals kept selling, decade after decade. They had the time. Grief apparently was a growth market. The books cannot tell you what to do about Mrs. Fenwick's teacup, though. They cannot tell you what to do about the moment when your hostess's eyes drop to your hem for a fraction of a second and then return to your face and she says, cheerfully, that you're looking very well. That sentence, cheerfully delivered, contains a judgment, a reassurance, a social verdict, and a small warning, and none of those things are in any edition of any manual. You receive all 4 simultaneously. You say thank you. There is a clock on Mrs. Lennox's mantel, and it ticks through all of this with the steady disinterest of an object that has watched a great many afternoon calls and formed no opinion about any of them. The seed cake sits untouched on its small plate. The tea cools by a degree. The audit, having happened, has nowhere further to go, and so the room simply continues, warm and proper, around the verdict it has already filed. You are present too. Mrs. Fenwick's eyes drop, briefly, to the row of crepe at your hem, and then back up to the seed cake. You sit at the writing desk after breakfast and open another stack of black-bordered envelopes because the cards have not stopped arriving, and the convention requires that you reply to each one personally on black-bordered notepaper of your own. The pile on the left is incoming. The pile on the right is replied to. The pile in the middle is what you are doing this morning, and tomorrow morning, and the morning after that. You count the cards. You count the days. You uncap the pen. You dip. The notepaper is sold specifically for this purpose. Manufacturers produce it in several grades: narrow border for distant acquaintances, wide border for close family, and the width of that black margin is, itself, legible information. A too thin border implies insufficient feeling. A too wide border on a note to a cousin implies you've lost your sense of proportion. The paper has opinions about your grief, and those opinions are precise to the millimetre. The language of the reply is fixed. There is a template, not printed on the page, but installed somewhere in your understanding of how things are done, and it runs roughly like this. Deeply sensible of your kind sympathy, sincerely grateful for your condolence, painfully aware of the irreparable loss. You vary the order slightly. You do not vary the content. Each note takes 7 minutes to produce, and you have 43 left in the pile, and your hand begins to cramp around the 9th. Mrs. Beaton has thoughts on this. Of course she does. The correspondence section of the etiquette literature specifies not only the phrasing but the timing. Replies should go out within a week of receipt, and a grieving woman who falls behind risks the secondary disaster of appearing ungrateful on top of bereaved. The social accounting here is not casual. It is the kind of ledger that doesn't close. Meanwhile, the black-bordered envelopes keep arriving from people you haven't thought about in years. A woman you met twice at a church picnic in 1868 sends her deepest sympathies on notepaper with a pressed violet tucked inside, which is touching and also requires a reply. Your husband's former colleague, a Mr. Fairweather, sends a card so formally worded it reads like a legal notice. A cousin you've met perhaps once, the one who rates 6 weeks of mourning under the standard schedule which you are currently fulfilling, sends 3 lines of handwriting so small you hold it at arm's length to read it, then hold it closer, then give up and write a standard reply anyway. There's a particular gesture that Adelaide Marsh, your next-door neighbour's sister-in-law, performs every time she stops by to check on you. She enters the sitting room, arranges herself in the armchair across from the writing desk, and picks up the incoming pile with both hands, holding it with the solemn, careful grip of someone handling evidence. She does not read the cards. She simply holds them, nods once, and sets them back down. Adelaide does this every visit. You have never asked her to stop. The correspondence requirement doesn't pause for the physical facts of grief. Your eyes are tired. The light through the window is thin and grey. The black ink on the black-bordered paper in the low morning light creates a situation where legibility is, at best, aspirational. You write anyway. This is not optional. It's the social equivalent of showing up. And showing up is the entire project right now, performed 1 7-minute note at a time. The outgoing pile grows slowly. The incoming pile does not shrink at the same rate, because people keep hearing about your loss and feeling moved to write. Someone hears from someone who heard from someone, and a card arrives in the post with a date 3 weeks after the death, sent by a person who was simply slow to find out. The delay doesn't excuse you from replying. The pile is patient, indifferent, and quietly accumulating. It only knows it has not been addressed. You receive callers in the front room from 2 to 4 o'clock on a Wednesday, because the deep mourning period permits visiting from immediate family and the rector but not casual social calls, and you must distinguish between them at the door. Your housemaid has been drilled. She holds the small silver tray for the calling cards. She glances at the name and then at the corner, where the visitor has folded a tiny crease to indicate the nature of the visit. Sympathy folds get in. Social folds wait, indefinitely, in the hall. The folding system is not written down anywhere official. It lives, like most of this, in the part of etiquette that exists between the manuals, understood completely by everyone who needs to know and utterly opaque to everyone who doesn't. Missus. Beaton covers 37 pages of mourning dress gradations and says almost nothing useful about calling cards. The calling card chapter is elsewhere. You have cross-referenced, you have read both twice. The fold is not in either. The front room is arranged for the period. The curtains are pulled to 3/4. Not fully closed, that signals a death in the house to passers-by, and the death was 3 months ago, and you've moved past that signal. Not fully open, that signals normalcy, which you have not. 3/4 is where grief lives in the middle period. The mantelpiece clock is still stopped at the hour he died. You haven't decided whether to restart it. The clock has no opinion on this. It just stands there, stopped at 7:20, radiating a faint institutional patience. Your sister Charlotte arrives at 2:15 with a small wrapped parcel of shortbread and the expression of someone who has practiced her expression in a mirror. She sits across from you on the good chair, the one with the velvet arm that's gone slightly thin, and she places her hands in her lap and asks how you are managing. You say you are managing. She nods. There is a pause. The shortbread sits between you on the low table, still wrapped, because neither of you wants to be the first one to reach for it, because somehow unwrapping shortbread feels like the wrong note. The pause goes on. The clock confirms nothing. Of course, the rector arrives at 2:30, which overlaps with Charlotte, which means you must now manage 2 simultaneous registers of sympathy in the same room. The rector takes the other chair. Charlotte shifts slightly. The rector asks if you've found comfort in Corinthians. You say you have been returning to it. This is technically true. You have opened the Bible twice this week, both times looking for Corinthians and landing in Kings. Close enough. The rector nods with the warm confidence of a man who finds all answers satisfying. The housemaid, whose name is Clara, moves through the room once with the tea tray, sets it on the side table, and withdraws without making eye contact with anyone, which is the correct behaviour, and which she has apparently perfected through instinct rather than instruction. She reappears briefly to offer the shortbread plate after someone has finally unwrapped it, Charlotte in the end, because the silence required action. Clara holds the plate at exactly the right angle. She does not look at the stopped clock. She has clearly decided not to have feelings about the stopped clock, and this is its own kind of professionalism. The visiting hours close at 4. The rector leaves first, which is correct. Charlotte stays 12 minutes past 4, which is incorrect but understandable, and you don't hold it against her. The social fold caller, a Mrs. Edith Penhaligon, who came at 3 and has been in the hall this entire time, has apparently given up and departed quietly sometime around 3:30. Her card is still on the tray. The corner fold is crisp, deliberate, and unmistakably social. She'll call again next Wednesday, probably. The hall will hold her again. You speak with the housekeeper on Friday morning about livery, because the household servants are now required to appear in mourning dress for as long as the family is in deep mourning, and there are 6 of them, and you are paying for the alterations. The cook needs a black apron, the butler needs a black armband and a black hatband. The 2 housemaids need new black dresses cut from a bolt the housekeeper has already ordered. The boot boy needs a black tie. You approve the figures one by one. The figures are not small. The bolt of black wool alone costs more than the boot boy earns in a fortnight. There's a supplement for the alterations. There's a supplement for the black ribbon trim on the housemaids' caps, which must be freshly applied and cannot simply be an old ribbon repinned, because the housekeeper knows what that looks like, and more importantly, so does the street. The household's grief is, in part, a visible exterior event, and the star for its visible exterior, Mrs. Pratt, your housekeeper, writes the figures in the ledger with the same expression she uses for everything, the expression of someone who has accepted the basic unreasonableness of the world and simply incorporated it into her filing system. She sets the pen down. She folds her hands. She does not comment on the total. This is why you kept her, Mrs. Pratt lays out the cloth samples on the morning room table. Black wool for the dresses, black cotton for the collars and cuffs, black ribbon for the caps in 3 widths. She presses each one flat with her thumb. Not silk, she says, for the housemaid's cap ribbon, because silk would be presumptuous. She has the careful, quiet, faintly ecclesiastical certainty of a woman who has run mourning households before and considers the distinction between cotton and silk to be a question with one correct answer. She points to the 1/2-inch ribbon, her thumbnail pressing a crease that is sharp, exact, and final. You nod. The boot boy, whose name is Thomas, who is 11, and who polishes 6 pairs of boots before anyone in the house has eaten breakfast, receives his black tie with the gravity of someone receiving a field decoration. He holds it in both hands. He is not entirely sure how to knot it, and will ask the underfootman, who is also not sure, and they will together produce something that is technically a knot. You are paying for all of this, and no one thinks of this as optional. The etiquette manuals don't address servant morning dress at length because they assume you already know, the way they assume you already know not to eat standing up or let your dog attend a christening. It is simply understood that a household in mourning is a household in mourning, and the boundary of that condition does not stop at the service stairs. Mrs. Pratt turns to the second page of the ledger. 6 servants, new or altered garments for each, black ribbon by the yard. Replacement. When the dye fades, and it fades, the dye always fades, the black wool going a peculiar greenish-brown in strong light, like it's quietly reconsidering its commitment. You will order replacements in 4 months. You already know you will order replacements in 4 months. Mrs. Pratt knows too. She has already penciled the date into the corner of the page in a small, neat, slightly disapproving hand. Clara, who held the rector's coat and Charlotte's gloves on Wednesday without once making eye contact with either of them, appears at the door of the morning room in her new black dress with her black ribboned cap and asks if you'll be requiring tea before the dressmaker arrives. The dress is slightly too long. She's pinned the hem herself, unevenly, in the dark of her room before the household woke. It's not quite right. It is the most correct thing in the house. You dress your daughter, who is 5, in white this morning because white is the proper mourning colour for very young children, and her ordinary dresses have been put away for the duration. The nursemaid has trimmed the collar and cuffs in black ribbon, and there is a small black sash at the waist. She does not understand why her favourite blue pinafore has disappeared. She asks. You tell her that her father has gone, which she already knew, and that this is what we wear now, which she did not. You tie the sash. The nursery has been draped in black and purple, as the etiquette books require. A length of dark fabric is pinned across the window, which reduces the light to something between afternoon and dusk for the entire duration of your mourning. Your daughter eats her breakfast porridge in this half-light every morning and does not complain, because she is 5 and has decided that this is simply what mornings look like now. She has adapted more thoroughly than you have. The ages of the children matter, in a system that has thought about it. The rule is loose at the edges but firm in the centre. Very young children wear white with black trim, which is considered both practical and symbolic, white being associated with innocence being considered a kind of pre-grief. As they get older, the white gives way to grey and then to full black by around age 10 or 11, depending on which etiquette manual your neighbour has been reading lately. The manuals do not entirely agree on this. They agree on almost nothing below the level of black is required, which is the one point of consensus, arrived at with what you might call aggressive enthusiasm. Missus. Wilmot across the landing, her daughter is 9, has the girl in charcoal grey with a black sash and a small crepe bow on her hat. The bow is slightly crooked because the girl keeps touching it. Missus. Wilmot straightens it each time with 2 fingers and a look that communicates volumes about social standards and personal responsibility, neither of which the 9-year-old finds particularly relevant to her mourning. Your daughter's infant mortality odds were, statistically speaking, not comfortable. Roughly 1 in 6 or 7 children born in England in the 1860s didn't reach age 5. You know this without having been told it in those terms, because you have been to enough small funerals to know it in your body instead. The white-trimmed black outfit your daughter is wearing this morning is sold by Jays in 3 sizes, toddler, child, and what the price card lists, with appalling brevity, as infant. The price card is printed in 2 columns. The infant column is the same width as the others. The nursemaid, Hannah, opens the chapter on children in manners and rules of good society and runs a finger down the page. Grandparents, parents, siblings, aunts and uncles, cousins and connections of the household, a category vague enough to be alarming. Hannah closes the book softly. It does not cover what to say to a 5-year-old about a black sash. She tells you with a small, careful, slightly apologetic shrug, been making it up since Tuesday. Jay's also sells the children's mourning in a half suit, the price card explains, a black sash and a pair of black ribbon trims sold separately from the dress. so that a white frock the child already owns can be converted at home for a few shillings rather than bought new. The frugal mother buys the trims and keeps the frock. The card recommends the full suit anyway. The card is printed by Jays. Your daughter holds out her wrist to show you the ribbon. She wants to know if it's pretty. You tell her yes. She accepts this. She picks up her spoon. You go up to the nursery to check on the new arrangement, which the housekeeper has overseen at your written instruction. The curtains have been swapped for black. The cot canopy has been swapped for black. There is a band of black crepe along the top of the wallpaper and a second band across the mantelpiece. The rocking horse, which a previous mistress acquired in a moment of indulgence, has had a small black ribbon tied around its neck. The room smells faintly of dye. The baby sleeps through it. The baby is in white, which is correct. White trimmed with a narrow black border at the hem and cuffs, which is also correct. The etiquette manual is very specific on this point, in the same calm tone it uses to discuss table settings and the proper address for a bishop. The baby does not know any of this. The baby has opinions about the window light. That's the full scope of the baby's concerns right now, Mrs. Hartley, the nurse, stands near the cot with her hands folded in front of her apron, which she has replaced with a black one for the occasion. She does not speak when you enter. She tips her head approximately 4 degrees, enough to signal that the room is in order, not enough to disturb the sleeping child. This is the correct amount of movement for a room like this. The room has decided. The rocking horse has been here longer than you have. It has survived 2 previous losses in this household, though nobody mentioned that when you arrived. Its painted eyes face forward with the mild vacancy of something that has seen a great deal and chosen equanimity. The wooden flanks are scuffed, faded, and patient under the new ribbon. The black ribbon around its neck is a small bow. Whoever tied it, the housekeeper, one of the maids, Mrs. Hartley herself, tied it with care. It is centered. The ends are even. Somebody stood in front of a wooden horse and made sure the bow was right, because in 1863, that is a thing that needed to be right. The servants are also in mourning. The housemaids are in black dresses with white caps and aprons replaced by black ones for the first period. The footmen have black armbands. The cook has a black ribbon pinned to her collar, which is already slightly crooked by 9 a.m. because the kitchen is not a place that holds ribbons well. The etiquette manuals are less specific about the cook's ribbon than they are about your second stage sleeve trimming, but the cook has sorted it out herself. The cook always sorts it out herself. Her ribbon came off a card she keeps in the dresser drawer for exactly this, between the string and the spare candle ends, because in a house this size somebody dies often enough that the ribbon is worth keeping on hand. The smell of dye is present throughout the upper floor, not quite chemical, not quite textile, something in between, the way a room smells when several new black things have arrived at once and are all quietly settling into the fabric of the walls. You will stop noticing it in approximately 4 days. You already know this from last time. Downstairs a door closes, the back door, probably the boot boy. Up here, the baby breathes against the white blanket, and Mrs. Hartley adjusts a fold at the cot's edge with 2 fingers, and the rocking horse faces the wall with its small, careful, perfectly centered black bow. Mrs. Hartley straightens. She does not look at you. The 4-degree tip of the head, again. The nursery is in order. You stand at the upstairs window at 9:30, because women of your class are not expected to attend the burial itself, and you watch the procession set off from the front door. The hearse is at the head, drawn by 4 black horses with ostrich plumes fixed in their headstalls. The mutes walk behind on either side, 2 professional silent mourners in long black coats and black gloves and black weepers on their hats. The coffin coach follows. The mourners' coaches follow that. You count the carriages. You count again. The mutes are not family. They're hired. There's a man in Holborn who supplies them at a set rate per hour, and they've done this today already, possibly twice. Their job is to stand, process, and look bereaved without actually being bereaved, which sounds difficult until you remember that most of them have been doing it long enough to achieve a kind of professional blankness that reads, from a distance, as exactly the right amount of grief. An actor would charge more. The mute simply charges less and doesn't require direction. The horses are the real spectacle. Each plume is roughly 18 inches tall, dyed to a blackness so complete it seems to absorb the morning light rather than reflect it. The horses have been trained not to startle. They move at a pace that makes ordinary walking look hurried. A small boy on the pavement opposite takes off his cap and holds it to his chest without anyone telling him to, which is either a sign of genuine social instinct or the result of having watched enough of these go past to know the drill. The cost of all this arrives in a single number. The full funeral, hearse, horses, plumes, mutes, coaches, coffin, grave plot, and associated draping of the house runs somewhere between £30 and £80 for a respectable middle-class household. The plumes alone are a line item. The mutes are another. The horses with their headstalls are a third. You could spend £40 on a funeral for a man who earned 60 a year, and no one in your street would raise an eyebrow. They'd raise an eyebrow if you spent less. The eyebrow is the point. The undertaker's man, Mr. Peck, arrived yesterday evening with a black-bordered card and a manner that suggested he had personally invented death and was generously offering to manage it on your behalf. He moved through the house with the quiet authority of a man who has been inside hundreds of grief-struck rooms and found that if you speak slowly and carry a leather-bound sample book, people rarely argue. He recommended the 4 horses. You'd asked about 2. He paused. He didn't say anything about 2 horses. He simply said 4 horses again, slightly more gently, and turned a page in the sample book. The procession turns the corner and the last coach disappears. The street returns to its ordinary state. A milkman, a dog, the sound of a cart somewhere on the next road over. The ostrich plumes are gone, the mutes are gone. The professional theatrical weight of the thing lifts all at once, the way weather lifts, and what's left is just the house, and the smell of flowers already beginning to turn, and the knowledge that the men will return in 2 hours, and the actual day will then require managing. You don't go downstairs yet. There's a second window here that faces the garden, and the light is coming in at an angle that has nothing to do with funerals. The rooks have returned to the elm. They weren't there this morning, and now they are, conducting their own ordinary business, completely unaware that Mr. Peck exists or that 4 horses just walked past with 18-inch plumes, or that you counted the carriages twice because the second time you were hoping the number had changed. You read the undertaker's bill at the writing desk 3 days after the funeral because your husband's brother has insisted that you go through it line by line before payment, and the line items are extraordinary. The hearse is £2. The 4 horses are £3. The plumes for the horses are 18 shillings. The mutes are a guinea apiece. The black drapery for the front door is 7 and 6. The fee for the bell at street. 2. James's is 11 shillings. The total is a sum you read twice. Mr. Peck, the undertaker, has organised this bill the way a confident man organises an argument, with many supporting points and a large final number that he has clearly been building toward the whole time. Each line is plausible. Individually, every item costs about what you'd expect a solemn and inconvenient thing to cost. Together they form a document that could refinance a small agricultural operation. You read it a third time. The number doesn't change. The mute line is the one your eye keeps returning to. A mute is a professional mourner, a man hired to stand at your door or walk ahead of the hearse wearing a black coat and a long crepe hatband, his face arranged into an expression of grave, practised, an entirely portable sorrow that he can apparently switch on at 7 a.m. for a guinea per occasion. You had 2. Some families have 4. Some families, the ambitious ones, the ones who want the street to feel the weight of their loss from 40 yards away, have 6. Your brother-in-law suggested 2 and looked briefly disappointed when you agreed. The mutes arrive with their own scarves and their own props. They are, in the most literal sense, a performance you have paid for, and now they are somewhere else doing it again for someone who also read the bill twice. The plumes are listed separately from the horses, which seems fair since one is a horse and one is a large black feather. 4 horses, £3. 18 shillings for the plumes, which are now presumably in Mr. Peck's workshop, being brushed and stored for the next procession 2 streets over. The plumes do not belong to you. They never did. They were borrowed grief accessories, rented at 18 shillings, briefly very solemn, now in a box. The bell fee is the line that gives you pause. 11 shillings to ring a bell at a church for 10 minutes works out to slightly over a shilling per minute of tolling, an extraordinary rate for a bell that presumably exists for other purposes as well. It doesn't complain about this. The bell just rings when someone pays 11 shillings and stops when they are used up. This is, in its way, the most honest transaction on the list. Thomas Alcott, your husband's brother, sits across the writing desk in the good chair, the one with the curved arms, running his finger along each line with the focused energy of a man who suspects he is being overcharged but cannot quite identify where. He hasn't lost a wife. He's lost a brother, which the etiquette manuals schedule for 6 months of half mourning and a black armband already visible on his left sleeve. His grief is real. His armband is neat. He has not been required to stop attending his club. You haven't paid the dressmaker's bill yet either. It's in the second drawer. It's larger than the undertaker's. Somehow this seems correct. The undertaker's work lasted an afternoon, but you'll be wearing the dressmaker's work every single day for the next 2 years and 3 months, in every weather, through every errand, through every morning that arrives anyway, regardless of what you feel about it arriving. The hearse went home, the crepe stayed. Thomas suggests you query the plume charge. You do not query the plume charge. You fold the bill and set it beside the inkwell and tell him you'll have it settled by Thursday, and he nods in the way men nod when they have been useful, and the room continues to be very quiet. You go to the small Whitby Jet retailer on Sloane Street because deep mourning permits only jet jewellery and you have nothing that meets the standard. The shop is dim by design. The cases are lined with black velvet. A man in a dark suit lays out an array of brooches, lockets, earrings and bracelets on the counter, each one carved from polished Whitby Jet, each one cold to the touch. You pick up a brooch shaped like a tiny urn wrapped in carved ivy. He tells you the price. You nod. The jet comes from Yorkshire, specifically from the cliffs around Whitby, where craftsmen have been digging out a particular seam of fossilised wood since at least the Bronze Age. Not wood from any familiar tree, wood from a monkey puzzle tree that fell into a shallow sea approximately 180 million years ago, turned slowly to stone, and has now been carved into a brooch you're wearing to a Tuesday afternoon call. The jet industry employs several hundred workers by the 1870s. Supply is adequate, demand is very, very reliable. The material itself is unusual. It isn't quite stone. It isn't quite wood. It's warm when you hold it long enough, which no other black material quite manages, and it takes a surface polish that catches candlelight in a way that looks genuinely expensive rather than merely black. The man in the dark suit tells you this. He uses the word times lustrous. He means it. The alternatives, he explains, are available at a lower price point. Vulcanite, hardened rubber, moulded into the same shapes, looks correct from across a room. Up close, the surface has a slight flatness to it, and in a warm parlour it gives off a faint rubbery smell, like the inside of a new boot, which is not precisely the impression you're hoping to make. French jet is black glass, heavier than it looks and cold all the way through. Both are acceptable by the etiquette standards. Neither is Whitby jet. He does not say this. He doesn't need to. Missus. Holloway, the shopkeeper's assistant, slides a tray of lockets toward you with the seriousness of someone presenting evidence at a trial. Each one contains a small oval space behind a glass window. She explains without being asked that the studio on the next street can fill that window with a hair arrangement within the fortnight. Braided borders. Woven forget-me-nots. A weeping willow in fine strands, sealed permanently under glass in a gold setting, made to order by a stranger you will never meet, from a piece of someone you will never stop missing. You already know about the hair studios. There are at least a dozen in London doing this work in the 1860s, most of them operating out of quiet rooms above stationers or milliners, where a woman brings in a small envelope of hair and leaves 2 weeks later with a brooch, a bracelet, a ring. Queen Victoria herself wears hair jewellery throughout her widowhood. This is frequently mentioned. It's meant to be a comfort. It is also, depending on the hour and instruction. You choose the ivy brooch. You choose a pair of jet earrings with a small carved leaf at the drop. You do not choose the vulcanite, because you can't afford the wrong smell at the wrong moment. And you cannot choose French jet, because you are not in second mourning yet, and you are 19 months from the hour. You're allowed to wear anything that isn't flat and light, absorbing and correct. The man wraps each piece in black tissue. He ties the parcel with a black ribbon. The bow is precise. Outside on Sloane Street the afternoon is damp and grey, which is, under the circumstances, appropriate. The jet brooch sits in the parcel under your arm, 180 million years old and 3 inches across. It has waited considerably longer than you have. You sit in a small upstairs room above a shop in Hatton Garden, where a woman with very thin spectacles has asked you to hand over the envelope containing a lock of your husband's hair. The envelope is unsealed. You took the lock yourself, with sewing scissors, the morning he died. She tips the hair onto a clean square of paper and arranges it in 3 small bundles. She asks what pattern you would like. You choose forget-me-nots, because the alternative is a weeping willow, and you are not ready for that. The room is small and very quiet. There's a display case along one wall showing finished pieces, brooches, rings, a bracelet with a braided border sealed under a dome of glass, lockets with the back open so you can see the contents, hair woven into flowers, hair woven into a wreath, hair woven into what appears to be a very small fern. The fern sits there under its glass like it has always been a fern and has no opinion about how it got that way. The woman with the spectacles is not a jeweller, she's a hair artist. There are at least a dozen studios like this one in 1860s London, and all of them are booked. The lock you've brought is sorted, cleaned, and softened. Then it's wound, twisted, or plaited, braided borders for bracelets, bundled petals for forget-me-nots, tiny fronds for the fern no one will ever admit resembles a fern. The finished piece is sealed under beveled glass in a gold or black enamel setting. Mounted. Done. Your husband becomes an object you can pin to your dress. She has a small ledger on the table and asks you his name, the date, and whether you'd like the word remembrance engraved on the back. You say yes to the name and the date. You do not say yes to remembrance. The ledger fills a little more. You are not the first appointment today. You won't be the last. Queen Victoria wore hair jewellery throughout her widowhood. This is less a comfort and more a confirmation that the woman at the top of the social pyramid has made the same choice you're making right now, in a small upstairs room above a shop on an ordinary Tuesday. The Queen's pieces were worked from Albert's hair and set in gold by her personal jeweller. Yours will be set in gold-filled enamel by a woman whose name you didn't catch. The grief is identical. The postcode is different. The brooch will take 3 weeks. You're given a receipt in a narrow envelope, the kind that feels like it contains a prescription. You hold it carefully. There's nothing breakable inside. There's nothing inside at all yet. It's just a date and a number. On the way out, you notice a second display case you missed on your way in. It holds mourning pieces made from children's hair, smaller settings, lighter colours, because the hair is fine. A tiny oval brooch with a circlet of pale gold curls sealed inside it, perfectly. The studio takes commissions of every weight. You keep your eyes on the staircase rail. The brass is cool, dulled, and slightly tarnished under your glove. You have been practicing this since December. You are getting better at it. The staircase down to the street is narrow. The woman with the spectacles doesn't follow you to the door. She's already back at her table, with the next envelope, the next lock on the clean square of paper. She asks the next woman what pattern she'd like. The next woman also chooses forget-me-nots. You return to the hair studio a week later to see the brooch in its preliminary form, and the woman with the spectacles spreads 3 samples on the work table. The first is the forget-me-not arrangement you chose, in 5 small woven flowers. The second is a braided border she has added for your consideration around the perimeter, requiring a small additional charge. The third is a tiny woven wreath she has included as a sample of what is possible should you commission a matching ring. She watches your face. You point. She writes it down. The gold setting will be fitted after the hairwork is complete. She explains this not because you asked, but because previous clients have asked, and she has learned to explain it before the question forms. The glass is beveled. The clasp is soldered. She says, soldered the way a solicitor says binding. You nod, because there is nothing to argue with. The brooch will be ready in another 2 weeks. You already know it will take 3. The forget-me-not is the popular option, and she will tell you as much if you give her an opening. The weeping willow is for more sentimental clients, she says, meaning older women, meaning mothers. The braided border is practical and has a longer visual life. She says visual life, and means that you will wear this piece for years, perhaps decades, and something too ornate will look exhausting by 1877. She is, in this way, something like a very quiet interior decorator, except the material is your husband's hair and the deadline was set by his death. The matching ring would require another cutting from the original supply. You brought only what she requested the first visit, a small envelope, sealed, labelled in your own handwriting. She opens a drawer and removes it, holds it up once to check the amount remaining, and closes the drawer without comment. There's enough. She writes this down too in a separate column, in case you change your mind later. The drawer doesn't quite close all the way. It never has, you suspect. It's the kind of drawer that has made peace with being slightly open. Jane, the younger assistant at the counter near the window, lifts a finished piece from a velvet tray and holds it toward the light to check the setting before boxing it. She does this with the focused, careful, and deliberate expression of someone diffusing something small and irreplaceable. You watch her. She doesn't notice. The piece she's examining is a locket, oval, with initials that aren't yours. Someone else's husband. Someone else's 3 weeks of waiting. The studio has several of these in progress at any given time. The ledger confirmed that on your first visit, and the overlap gives the place a faint quality of a library, everyone quietly working through their own particular grief at adjacent tables. You ask whether there's a standard size for the ring, and the woman with the spectacles produces a small wooden sizing card without looking up. You try 4. The third fits, she writes down the number. This is all very efficient for something that has made you cry in a public street twice this week. The transaction moves forward in small recorded steps, which is, you're slowly realizing, the point. You are not here only for the brooch. You are here for a thing to do with your hands on a Tuesday that isn't sitting in the front room with his dressing gown still on the hook. She tells you the total for both pieces, the brooch with the braided border and the ring, and you accept it the way you've accepted most things lately, without surprise, without much feeling at all. Just the flat, quiet, faintly clerical recognition that this is the number and you will pay it. She gives you a second receipt. The first one is at home, tucked into the back of the household ledger. You've looked at it twice already without meaning to. You buy a vulcanite brooch for your housekeeper, who is mourning her own sister and cannot afford the Whitby variety, and you give it to her on a Sunday morning in the parlour. The brooch is carved into a small dark rose. It is the right colour. It is the right shape. It is half the weight of jet, and it has a faint rubbery smell when it warms against the skin, which you can detect when she pins it to her collar. She holds it for a moment. She thanks you. She wears it that afternoon. Vulcanite is hardened rubber. Charles Goodyear developed the process in the 1840s, and within a decade someone looked at the results and thought, mourning jewellery. It is black, it can be carved, it holds detail well, and it costs a fraction of Whitby jet. It is also, technically, a tire, but in the 1860s that observation is not yet available to anyone, so it functions as a dignified substitute, and nobody thinks much about it. The smell is the thing. Jet is warm and faintly organic. It has something of old wood about it, which makes sense given that it is old wood, fossilized and ancient as it is. It carries a slight resinous quality that jewelers and buyers both recognize as correct. Vulcanite does not smell like that. Vulcanite smells like vulcanite. Not aggressively. Not at every moment. But on a warm afternoon, pinned close to the throat, it makes a quiet announcement. The brooch is present. It is doing its best. It is not fooling anyone with a nose. There is also French jet, which is not jet either. French jet is black glass, pressed, faceted, cut to catch light. It glitters slightly, which is already a small problem, since deep mourning fabric is specifically chosen to absorb light rather than reflect it. Parramatta does not glitter. Crepe does not glitter. A necklace that glitters in the wrong months is a social event. But French jet is cheaper than Whitby, cheaper than vulcanite in some grades, and it came from workshops in Bohemia and Paris at industrial speed, churned out by the gross for people who needed to look correct and could not afford to be precious about it. Your housekeeper, whose name is Mrs. Enid Pratt, adjusts the brooch twice that afternoon while laying the table. The first adjustment is practical. The second is something else, a small private gesture, the kind of thing hands do when the mind is somewhere it can't quite reach. You notice. You don't comment. The brooch holds its position on her collar for the rest of the day, the dark rose sitting flat, modest, and correct against the worn black of her dress. Mrs. Pratt's sister was buried in Whitechapel 3 months ago in a plain coffin paid for in 8 weekly instalments by the surviving family. Mrs. Pratt did not attend. The train fare was not in the budget, and her own mourning has been observed in the back kitchen, with a black armband her niece sewed for her, and now the small dark rose at her collar. She has worn one black dress since November. It has gone slightly faintly apologetically green at the elbows. The brooch sits at her collar exactly where the rose shape is meant to sit, and it does its modest work without comment. Mrs. Pratt wears the vulcanite rose for the remainder of the week. On Thursday it catches a warm patch of afternoon sun through the kitchen window and the smell surfaces briefly, faint and industrial. Not unpleasant exactly, just specific. She doesn't mention it. You don't mention it. The brooch is doing its job. That is, in the end, exactly what was asked of it. You see your brother for the first time in 6 weeks, and he is dressed for the visit in his ordinary grey suit with a black armband sewn around the upper left sleeve, a black hatband on his usual hat, and black gloves laid carefully on the hall table beside his stick. He has been in mourning since the same day you have. The armband is 2 inches wide, the hatband is 3. He keeps the black gloves on for the first quarter hour and then removes them, and you watch him do it. He'll be done in 3 months. You have 21 months remaining. The armband itself is a modest object. It does not require a specific fabric. It does not need to be Parramatta. It will not fade to rusty brown in August humidity, scratch the inside of his wrist, or cost him a quarter of his annual income. He did not sit in a softly carpeted room while a seamstress altered his grief to fit. He purchased the armband at a haberdasher's for a few pence, had it sewn on, and that was the whole transaction. His mourning cost him an afternoon. The hatband is called a weeper, which is perhaps the most Victorian thing anyone has ever named a piece of fabric. It is called a weeper, not because your husband's brother is weeping. He is not. He is asking about your coal arrangement for winter, but because in an earlier era, long trailing hatbands were supposed to represent tears falling. Somewhere between the 17th century and now, the trailing part shrank to 3 inches of flat ribbon and the symbolism stayed. The weeper persists. Your husband's brother tips his hat to a neighbour in the street outside, and both men nod, and the entire social transaction is complete. He is a man who has lost someone. Everyone can see. Nothing further is required. Your armband is your whole wardrobe. The etiquette manuals, missus. Beaton, Manners and Rules of Good Society, and half a dozen of their competitors are extremely precise about this divergence and completely unbothered by it. The schedules run to tables. A widower, 3 months. A widow, 2 years and 3 months, divided into stages with their own fabric requirements and their own specific end dates. A widower may return to ordinary dress and ordinary social engagements in a season. He may remarry within the year without public comment. He has expressed his grief correctly. The grief had a form. The form has been completed. Meanwhile, your crape is already starting to go at the hem. Your husband's brother settles into the chair across from yours and begins, quite sincerely, to ask how you are getting on. He means it. He is not a bad man. He lost the same person you lost, and he is genuinely here to see you, genuinely concerned about the coal, genuinely present. The asymmetry is not his invention. He didn't write the manuals. He didn't found Jay's. He didn't build the Courtaulds factory or decide that crepe should cost what it costs. He is just wearing the armband, which is all anyone ever asked of him. You watch Thomas, your husband's brother, who has always had the specific talent of sitting comfortably in any chair, settled, unhurried, and weightless, cross one leg over the other and reach for the biscuits your housekeeper has arranged on the low table. His suit is simply grey, with the armband, with the hatband now resting on the hall table, and he looks like himself. He looks exactly like himself. You are wearing approximately 11 pounds of black fabric and a brooch that smells faintly of rubber. The visit lasts 2 hours. He promises to come again in a fortnight. He retrieves the hat from the hall table, settles it on his head, and the weeper sits just above the brim, neat and correct and barely there. You close the door. The Parramatta makes a soft sound against the floor. The house is quiet in the specific way houses get quiet when the one person who doesn't have to be here has just left. You attend the 11 o'clock service at St. James's on the first Sunday you are permitted to leave the house, and the seating arrangement has been adjusted in your absence. The verger meets you at the door and walks you, with small ceremonial slowness, to a pew nearer the rear than your usual one, because newly bereaved women are seated where they will not be visually central to the congregation. You sit. The hymn book is placed in your hands. The veil stays down through the entire service. You do not sing. The woman 3 pews forward is in half mourning. You can tell because she's wearing grey with a lavender trim at the cuff, the specific lavender that signals she is somewhere in her 22nd or 23rd month, almost out the other side. She has a hat with a small feather. The feather is not black. You note the feather. You note that she is not looking at you. Being looked at is the whole of the mourning. Everyone in the nave has already assessed your crape before the first hymn. They are not being rude. They are reading you the way a room reads a formal document, for structure, for compliance, for any irregularities that might require comment later over tea. The depth of your mourning is public information. It is, in a sense, your current position statement on grief, published weekly, reviewed by the congregation, filed under your married name. The crepe is doing what crepe does in a heated building on a mild Sunday in October. It holds warmth against your skin like a second and less sympathetic body. The collar has stiffened in the warmth and rides up against your jaw whenever you bow your head for the prayers, so you have learned to bow only from the neck, a small economy of motion the pew in front of you cannot see. The woman seated to your left, a Mrs. Alderton, who lost her husband's father in the spring, is in 6-month mourning for a parent-in-law. Her crepe is newer than yours. You can tell. Hers hasn't begun to go at the edges yet. The sermon is about endurance. The vicar delivers it with the satisfied steadiness of a man who has never had to wear anything that absorbed heat. He speaks of patience as a virtue. He speaks of the comfort of community. He does not mention that the community has moved you 3 pews back. After the service, a woman named Mrs. Hartwell approaches you in the vestibule and takes both your hands and says nothing for a long moment, which is the correct social form. She then says your husband was a fine man, which is also correct. She then glances at the trim of your sleeve, just the one glance, quick and involuntary, and her expression stays perfectly warm. She's checking the crepe. You know. She knows you know. Neither of you mentions it. Mrs. Hartwell releases your hands with the gentle finality of someone placing a document in a drawer. Outside, the light falls on the black parramatta at a flat angle and produces nothing. No sheen, no warmth, no reflected colour. This is the point. Parramatta was chosen for deep mourning because it is flat, matte, and entirely uninterested in the sun. You are wearing the visual equivalent of a closed door. A woman beside the churchyard gate in a blue wool coat looks at you and then quickly away, with the specific expression people use when they've accidentally met the eyes of someone carrying a very heavy thing. You receive an invitation to your cousin's wedding, which is being held in October, and you sit with the card on the writing desk for an entire afternoon working out whether the etiquette permits acceptance. By October you will be 8 months into deep mourning, which is well short of the 12-month minimum. Attendance at any festive occasion in deep mourning is forbidden by Mrs. Beaton, by manners and rules of good society, and by the unanimous opinion of your aunts. You write the regret, you seal it, you send the maid out with it. The cousin, for the record, requires 6 weeks of mourning from you. 6 weeks. If he had died instead of getting married, you would have worn black for 6 weeks, discharged the obligation, and moved on with your life. He did not die. He is getting married in October, and you cannot attend because the man you actually loved is dead, and the etiquette governing that situation requires you to be unavailable at weddings for another 4 months. The cousin will understand. The cousin has no choice but to understand. The invitation itself is cream-coloured cardstock. Good weight. Your name is written in a copper plate hand by someone who charges extra for the loops. You turn it face down on the desk so the cream doesn't keep catching your eye, because the cream is the colour of everything you are not permitted to be, and the writing desk has learned, over the last 8 months, how long you tend to sit at it looking at things you cannot keep. Your aunts, both of them, had counselled you on exactly this situation in July, when it became clear the October date was confirmed. Aunt Prudence, the elder, had delivered her verdict from the wing-back chair in the morning room with the solemnity of a magistrate reading a sentence. 8 months is 8 months, she said. She folded her hands. She did not blink. Your other aunt, Maud, had nodded from the footstool with the practised agreement of someone who has spent 40 years not disagreeing with Aunt Prudence. Mrs. Beaton, to her credit, is thorough. She itemizes grief the way an accountant itemizes stock, line by line, patient, exact, and unmoved, with no allowance for sentiment. The mourning periods are set out with the precision of a parliamentary bill, and a cousin, your cousin, the one getting married in October, sits at 6 weeks. 6 weeks for a cousin. That is his line in the ledger. The schedule does not have a column for how you feel about the category. It has a column for the category. That is enough. What the schedule does not cover is the collision. You're in month 8 of spouse mourning. The cousin is getting married in month 8 of spouse mourning. These two facts have met each other like 2 trains on the same track. and the result is a cream-coloured card sitting face down on your writing desk on a Tuesday afternoon. Somewhere in London, your cousin is addressing the remaining invitations. He does not know about the afternoon you spent with his card. He does not know about Aunt Prudence and her folded hands. He will receive your regret within the week, read it over breakfast, say something forgiving and slightly irritated, and pass the marmalade. This is probably fine. The marmalade will not notice either way. The maid returns 20 minutes later with receipts from the post. She sets them on the hall table and says nothing, because there is nothing to say. The card is no longer on the desk. The afternoon is over. October is still October, and the wedding will happen exactly as planned, and there will be dancing, a supper, and a cake, and pale, bright, faintly festive silk everywhere you look, and you won't be there to see any of it. The etiquette has decided. You confirmed the etiquette's decision in your own handwriting, sealed it with your own wax, and sent it out into the world on your own behalf. It looks from the outside identical to grief. You receive the letter from Yorkshire on a Thursday and learn that your second cousin Elizabeth, whom you last saw at a christening when you were both 19, has died of a chest infection. The relevant entry in the etiquette manual is precise. A second cousin requires 6 weeks of mourning. You are already in deep mourning for your husband, so the new 6 weeks is folded inside the existing 2 years and 3 months. You note it in the ledger. You do not need a new dress. You do need a new black-bordered envelope. The ledger is a real object. It sits on the writing desk next to the mourning correspondence paper, which has a black border of exactly the correct width for your current stage, 1 inch for deep mourning, narrowing to 1/4 inch as you progress. As though grief is a document format with version control, you record Elizabeth's name, her date of death as given in the letter, the relationship, the prescribed period, and the overlap with the existing entry for your husband. 6 weeks. Folded. No new expenditure. The etiquette manuals, missus, beaten, manners and rules of good society, several others with the same authority and the same rulings, have produced between them a complete schedule of grief by kinship. A second cousin, 6 weeks, though the manual notes this is already generous. The manual lists the window the way a railway timetable lists a train. 6 weeks, acknowledged, recorded. 6 weeks, in practice, means nothing when you are already inside a 2-year sentence. The 6 weeks disappears into the larger period the way a small debt disappears into a large one. But the manual is clear that the 6 weeks must be observed, acknowledged and recorded, not to change your dress, which is already correct, but to change your correspondence paper, your condolence calls, and the precise weight of your demeanour when Elizabeth's name comes up in conversation. You must look slightly more burdened this week than you looked last week. The manual does not explain how to perform this. You are expected to know. Missus. Herringshaw from number 14 sends a note of condolence about Elizabeth on Saturday. Written on paper with a border slightly too wide for her own mourning stage, she is in second mourning for a father-in-law. You notice. You do not say anything. You file the note in the correspondence drawer, which is organised chronologically by death. The drawer is full. The black bordered envelope arrives from the stationer's by midday Monday. Your parlour maid, Agnes, carries it in on a small tray with the post, holding the tray with both hands and setting it down without making eye contact, because Agnes has learned by now that the tray is not a conversation. She has worked here for 14 months and delivered roughly 40 black bordered items in that time. She sets the tray down, adjusts it 1/4 inch to the left, and goes. The 1/4 inch is hers. Agnes believes in precision. You sit at the writing desk and compose the reply to Yorkshire. You express your sorrow. You note that Elizabeth was a warm and generous spirit, which you are able to write with some confidence because it is the correct thing to write, and also because you actually don't remember Elizabeth well enough to contradict it. She was 19. You were 19. There was a christening, and someone's aunt made a remark about the weather, and Elizabeth laughed. That is what you have. It goes into the envelope. The envelope is sealed with black wax. The black wax has a faint chemical smell, slightly waxy, not quite like ordinary candle wax. It is close to the smell of crape, which is simply the atmosphere now, the ambient note of the last 18 months, slightly dusty, slightly mineral, present in every room. Elizabeth gets 6 weeks. The ledger records it. In 7 weeks the entry will close, the overlap will have resolved, and nothing about your dress will change because nothing about your dress was going to change anyway. You are in month 18 of 27. The cousin column updates itself and moves on. You read the Times at breakfast and learn that the Duchess of Cambridge has died, which means the court will go into mourning for 6 weeks, which means every household with any pretension to gentility on your street will follow suit. The dressmaker on the corner will be busy by noon. The mourning warehouses will be opening at 7 instead of 9. Within a day, the whole of Belgravia will be black. You are already in black. The royal cascade simply means that this week you will look unremarkable. Mrs. Partridge, across the road, sends her boot boy to Jay's at 9:30, which you observe through the parlour window. The boy is in his ordinary brown jacket and carrying a folded note in one hand. By 11, the second housemaid is at the door receiving a parcel of black ribbon and a length of crepe on a brown paper bolt, the fabric stiff, matte, and lightless even in the doorway sun. By 4:30, the windows at number 16 are draped in black, and so are the windows at number 18, and so are most of the windows on the south side of the square. The mechanism doesn't require a law or an announcement. It requires only the Times and a street where people watch each other's boot boys. The woman across the road, Mrs. Partridge, broad-shouldered, always slightly windswept, stands at her door in a day dress that is technically a plum colour. She sees you. You see her. Neither of you say anything. She goes inside, and her housemaid appears at the upper window, shaking out a black shawl. You continue your walk. Mrs. Partridge has now changed into a black silk she clearly owns from the last court morning, 2 summers ago, and which has gone slightly, faintly perceptibly green at the cuffs. She crosses the road toward the postbox with the practised confidence of a woman who has done this drill. She nods to you from 12 feet away. You nod back. Neither of you mentions that her crepe collar is the wrong cut for this season. She has noticed, and you have noticed, and the postbox does not care. For a woman who isn't already in black, the cascade is a practical emergency. 6 weeks isn't long enough to justify a full mourning wardrobe, but it's far too long to wear colours in public without comment. Jays knows this. Jays has always known this. The warehouse keeps a category of stock specifically calibrated for court mourning. Lighter, faster, cheaper, designed to be worn for 6 weeks and then released back into civilian life without having cost a fortune. Roughly the moral equivalent of renting formal wear for a wedding, except the occasion is the death of someone you've never met. The etiquette manual you own, the one on the small shelf above the writing desk, has 3 pages on court mourning. It notes which grades of relative to the deceased require which depth of dress, and for how long. A distant connection to the royal family might merit only the hatband and dark gloves. A more proximate social relationship warrants more. The manual doesn't list what to do when you are already in the deepest possible mourning for your own husband, while the court announces 6 weeks for a duchess. The manual assumes you are working with one death at a time. A reasonable editorial position, but optimistic. None of this is new. Victoria has been issuing court mourning notices for decades. Every death in the extended royal web, cousins, in-laws, foreign monarchs related by blood or treaty, sends its ripple. The court has mourned so frequently that the announcements in the Times have a practiced administrative tone. Regret, duration, dates. You fold the paper. Your crepe sleeve has left its faint mark on the white tablecloth again. You lift the butter knife and finish your toast instead. Outside, the dressmaker's door opens. She's taken down the green fabric from her window display and replaced it with black serge. She works fast. She always works fast this week. You move from deep mourning to second mourning 12 months and a day after your husband's death, in a process the etiquette manuals call slighting, which involves the careful, prescribed removal of certain elements of the deep mourning costume and the cautious addition of others. The crepe at the hem of the skirt comes off first. The crepe at the cuffs is reduced from 3 rows to 1. The crepe on the bonnet is replaced with plain black silk. Your dressmaker comes to the house on a Wednesday morning. She brings pins. Her name is Mrs. Halt, and she kneels on the parlour floor with the pins held between her lips in a way that should be alarming and has become, over the past year, entirely familiar. She does not look at your face while she works. This is a professional courtesy. She measures from the hem with the same focused, patient, and unhurried attention a surgeon brings to a difficult procedure, and when she removes a row of crepe from the cuff, She folds it twice before setting it aside, like a document that might need to be referenced later. The slighting process takes 3 visits across 9 days, not 1 visit, not a morning. 3 separate appointments with a woman who charges by the hour and brings her own thread. The number of alterations required for second mourning is, depending on your wardrobe and the rigour of your original deep mourning investment, between 12 and 30 individual garments. The black silk now permitted at the collar introduces a slight sheen. That sheen is your only concession to the idea that the world contains light. Second mourning permits a narrow, considered, faintly grudging set of changes. Jet jewellery continues. Plain black gloves continue. The bonnet transitions from the deep black veil to a shorter one, which falls only to the shoulder rather than the face. A modification that means strangers can now see your expression, which you may or may not regard as progress. Some women regard it as a fresh inconvenience. Some cry at the first fitting. The etiquette manuals present this as a natural brightening. The etiquette manuals have not attended many fittings. 9 months into second mourning, you begin half mourning, which is its own negotiation. The crape is gone entirely. Grey is now permitted. Lavender is permitted. A specific careful mauve is permitted. A mauve with an odd origin we'll get to shortly. For now, it is enough to know that the establishment annexed it for half mourning and never looked back. But that is months away. Today there is only Mrs. Holt and the cuff. She unpicks the basting thread along the inside of the sleeve, draws the seam open a 1/4 inch to let the lining breathe, and retacks it with stitches so small you cannot see them unless you hold the cuff to the window. The old crepe leaves a faint impression in the silk where it sat for a year, a ghost of texture you can feel with a thumbnail but never quite smooth away. She presses it under a damp cloth. The smell of warm fabric fills the parlour. The total prescribed period, deep mourning, second mourning, half mourning, runs 2 years and 3 months. This is for a husband. The manuals state the figure the way a tax form states a deadline. Line 14, box C, carry the number forward, do not exceed the prescribed figure. They do not ask whether 2 years and 3 months is a long time. They have decided that it is the correct time. And through all of it, Mrs. Holt comes on Wednesdays. She removes a row, she adds a row, she folds the excess crepe and sets it aside. You stand very still while she works because the fabric does not forgive sudden movement and because there is nowhere in the slighting process to hurry. You are 21 months from wearing colour. You count the remaining months the way you count steps on a staircase in the dark, not looking down, just trusting the number. You enter half mourning at the 22nd month, which permits, for the first time since you cannot remember when, the addition of a colour. The colour is mauve. You stand in front of the cheval glass in a grey silk dress trimmed with mauve ribbon at the cuffs and collar, and you see something that is not, technically, black, for the first time since the funeral. The ribbon is 6 months old in the world, but new on you. You touch the cuff. You step back. You walk downstairs to breakfast. The mauve is not an accident. The dressmaker mentions the name in passing while pinning the cuff. Perkin, the young chemist, the one who was after malaria and found this instead. You have seen the name before, stamped on the side of a small tin in the dyer's window 2 streets over. He was 18. He was attempting to cure a fever. He got the fashion industry. The dye was named Mauvain, and an etiquette culture that needed a precise colour for month 22 annexed it within a season. Half mourning permits a small, careful, much-discussed palette. Grey, lavender, mauve, white, in very small quantities. The crepe is gone. The parramatta can be softened. You may now wear silk with a slight sheen. Not too much sheen. Sheen is a judgment call, and every woman on your street has an opinion. You are still not wearing colour. You are wearing the colours that live in the hallway between grief and colour, the shades that exist specifically to signal that you are almost done but not yet offensive about it. Missus, Hartley next door, she has been watching, gives you a look over the garden wall that contains several paragraphs. The look says, 22 months, correct. The look also says, the ribbon is perhaps slightly wide for a Wednesday. You nod. She nods. The ribbon stays. The social calendar also changes. Deep mourning excluded you from most entertainments. No balls, no concerts, nothing that could be read as cheerful. Second mourning relaxed this slightly but not generously. Half mourning gives you back a wedge of ordinary life, which means you are now visible again in public, which means the ribbon's width is, in fact, being assessed by Mrs. Hartley and everyone else with line of sight. This is where you become aware that grief has a re-entry problem. You've been absent from ordinary social circulation for nearly 2 years. The conversations have continued without you. The visiting cards have circulated. Someone's daughter has married. Someone else's has not. You arrive back into the drawing room in grey silk and mauve ribbon and feel less like a returned traveller and more like a piece of furniture that has been in storage and must now be assessed for structural damage. The dress helps, not because it is beautiful, it is tasteful, which is different, and in some lights practically the same as invisible, but because it tells the room precisely where you are in the schedule. Everyone who can read an etiquette manual, which is everyone in the room, knows you are at month 22 or later. You don't have to explain. The mauve does it. The mauve is, in its way, a very efficient administrative document. And yet the mauve is also the first morning in almost 2 years that you have stood in front of a mirror and seen yourself in something other than the armour. The grey silk moves differently. It makes a sound. It isn't the flat, matte, sound-absorbing weight of Parramatta. It catches light at the cuffs where the ribbon sits, a small, restless and deliberate shine. The Parramatta never once allowed. The cuffs notice. You are aware, in a way you haven't been for some time, of what colour you are wearing. Not grief colour, just a colour, a very cautious one, but yours. You find a pamphlet pushed under your front door on a Tuesday morning, addressed to no one by name, printed cheaply on grey paper, signed by the Rational Dress Society. The pamphlet argues that the mourning system is a financial trap for women, that the dyes are toxic, that the crape is bad for the lungs, that the costs ruin households already in grief, and that the entire system serves the textile industry rather than the bereaved. You read it twice at the breakfast table. You fold it. You put it in the desk drawer. The Society are not radicals in any theatrical sense. They are women who have done the arithmetic. The pamphlet lists figures, columned and totalled, in the calm handwriting of someone who has spent an evening with a ledger. The cost in the first month alone runs to several months of a working wage. The crape fades. It can't be washed. Water spots it. Brushing raises a nap that never lies flat again, and a single damp afternoon turns the black to a rusty brown along every fold. So you replace it. The figures compound the way the debt does, quiet, methodical, interested in your continued participation. The pamphlet is not, it is careful to say, arguing against grief. It says so in the 3rd paragraph, in a sentence that has clearly been revised several times and still reads a little defensively. You can see where someone has crossed out a word in pencil and written another above it. The pencil pressed harder than was strictly necessary. Courtaulds would not comment. Courtaulds never commented. Courtaulds crepe is a brand. The brand is the entire industry. There is no second supplier worth naming. The factory does not need to advertise. Etiquette does the advertising. Mrs. Beaton does the advertising. The woman across the street, whose crepe is newer than yours, does the advertising. Mrs. Alderton, at number 14, slides the pamphlet back to you over the garden wall without comment. She holds it by one corner with a careful, distant and deliberate distaste, the way you'd return something that had been in a puddle. She is still in second mourning for her father-in-law. Her gloves are very black. She says nothing, which is its own kind of response. You read the paragraph about the dye. You already know about the dye. You have seen what it does to a collarbone in the rain. You read the paragraph about the crape against the wrist and neck. You already know. You read the paragraph about full Parramatta in August sun, and you remember the walk to the chemist when you arrived damp at the small of your back and asked the maid for water. The pamphlet is not telling you anything you have not already worn. And yet the etiquette manuals keep selling. Manners and Rules of Good Society reaches 35 editions. 35. Each edition specifies the mourning periods with the precision of a tax schedule, the figures printed flat and final, indifferent to whether you ever met the people they bind you to. The schedule does not ask whether you actually liked them. The schedule is not interested in that data. You take the pamphlet out of the desk drawer that evening. You read the 3rd paragraph again, the careful, defensive one, the one that says this is not about grief. You believe it. You also believe that belief costs nothing, and the crape costs approximately 18 shillings a yard and will be rusty brown by August. You put the pamphlet back in the drawer. The drawer closes with a small, firm, unremarkable click. You attend a small evening gathering at the home of an old friend 23 months after the funeral, in second mourning, with the slightest possible deviation from the strictest reading of the timeline. You wear black silk without crape, a single jet brooch, and grey gloves. Within 48 hours, an item appears in a society column suggesting that a recently bereaved lady was observed at a social gathering whose tone was not consistent with her status. The item does not name you. Everyone you know reads it. Everyone you know identifies you. The column doesn't need your name. That's the mechanics of it. A description is enough. The neighbourhood, the garment, the gloves, and the rest assembles itself across breakfast tables in under a morning. A name would be too blunt. Insinuation travels faster and settles deeper, like a dye that doesn't wash out, which you know something about. Lily Langtry in 1878 was the precedent everyone reads in the column without it being printed. Her brother Clement died. She appeared at a social event shortly after. The mourning dress she wore was deemed insufficiently heavy for the occasion, and the press said so. Langtry was one of the most photographed women in England. She had attended the event. She had worn black. It was not enough black, not the right black, not the correctly textured and correctly timed black. The press said so, and the press was read, and that was that. The columnist who wrote the item is a man named Mr. Pendle, who works 2 paragraphs at a time from a back office in Holborn. He has never met you. He receives a note from a regular informant, a woman at the gathering, almost certainly, and he writes the item in 11 minutes, between a piece on the new opera and a piece on a duchess's bonnet. He does not think about you again that day. The note from the informant goes back in his desk drawer, undated, anonymous, and slightly perfumed. Missus. Harrington, your friend's neighbour, the one with the small, precise handwriting, sends you a note the morning after the column appears. It says she hopes you are well, and that the recent weeks must have been difficult. The note is warm. The note is entirely without comfort. She signs it with 2 lines of careful sympathy that somehow contain the column's entire implication without once referencing it. She has been doing this for years. The handwriting never wavers. You run through the arithmetic again, the way you've done since the item appeared. 23 months. You are technically inside the half-mourning window, but the transition is permitted, not announced. And the gathering was small but not invisible. And, this is the part that keeps returning, you wore grey gloves. Grey gloves are permitted. Grey gloves are half-mourning. Grey gloves are also, apparently, legible at 40 feet to anyone looking for them. The etiquette manuals are very calm about all of this. They list the windows and the permitted colours and the acceptable fabrics with the placid confidence of a document that has never had to wear any of them. 6 weeks for a cousin. Graduated return to colour, beginning with lavender, then mauve, then dove grey, which is basically a Duolingo streak, except the reward at the end is 1 beige glove and a column item about what you did wrong. You write, no reply to the column. There is no mechanism for reply. The column didn't ask a question. It made an observation and distributed it to the readership, and the readership accepted it, and the social facts arranged themselves accordingly. You are, for the next several weeks, a woman who was seen at the wrong event, in the wrong weight of black, until enough time passes, or until someone more visible than you makes a more visible error. You put the grey gloves away. They are at the back of the drawer, behind the jet brooch, next to the pamphlet from the Rational Dress Society that Mrs. Alderton returned without a word. The drawer closes. The drawer keeps its counsel. You stand in the bedroom at the end of the 27th month, in front of the open lid of a cedar trunk, and you fold the deep mourning dress along the seams the way the dressmaker showed you. The crepe has already faded. The bodice still smells faintly chemical. You lay it in the trunk on a sheet of tissue. You close the lid. You leave the half-mourning grey hanging in the wardrobe, because the convention permits, but does not require, the return to colour. You stand a moment longer. You decide. The etiquette manuals are very clear about the end. They are not clear about how it feels. Manners and Rules of Good Society specifies the week count for a cousin down to a margin of error of about 4 days, but it has nothing to say about the morning you open the wardrobe and the black dress just sits there, closed and quiet, like something that knows you're thinking about it. What you are putting down is heavier than you remembered. The deep mourning bodice is parramatta and crepe. dense, layered, and faintly chemical, even empty. The kind of heavy that accumulates across 12 months of wearing it in summer kitchens and carriages and church pews that don't ventilate. The dye ran once or twice in the rain, the way you knew it would. The crepe is rough in a way that doesn't improve with familiarity. It just becomes the texture of the period, the way certain years have a smell. You wore this, every day, for a year. Then 9 more months of something slightly lighter. Then 6 months of grey that was technically progress. The trunk is cedar because cedar repels moths, and moths have no sentimentality whatsoever. A moth will eat a year of your life without pausing. You lay a second sheet of tissue over the bodice, smooth it flat, and consider the grey. The grey is permitted for another 6 months if you choose it. It is not required. This is the system's one concession to individual judgment, and it lands with the quiet generosity of someone handing you back a hat they borrowed 2 years ago. Mrs. Fallow, the seamstress on your street, the one who pins hems with her mouth full and somehow never swallows any, tells you that a woman 2 streets over stayed in half mourning for an additional 8 months because she couldn't decide, and nobody said anything, and she seemed fine. She gestures with the pin still between her lips. This is apparently a comfort. Your Aunt Margaret is 43 and has been in some form of black since 1857. A husband, then a sister, then a father, then a brother-in-law she barely knew but had to observe for anyway. The black barely packed before a new obligation arrived. Not theatrical, just arithmetic. The system didn't compound the periods. It simply reset them. She finished one and started the next. Her trunk never fully closed. The grey hangs in the wardrobe. On the shelf above it, folded in brown paper, is something in a colour that isn't quite blue and isn't quite lavender. The half-mourning palette's most ambitious offering. You bought it at the end of the 21st month, which is when the manuals permit it. You haven't worn it. It's been waiting up there with the patience of an object that has nowhere else to be. You close the wardrobe. The cedar trunk sits at the foot of the bed. The tissue paper is folded tight over something that cost you £15, faded in the second summer, streaked your skin in the rain, and was present for every difficult morning of the last 2 years and 3 months. The dress doesn't care about any of this. It just sits in the dark, smelling faintly of something you'll recognise for the rest of your life without being able to name it. You decide to wear the grey today. Tomorrow you'll decide again. So that was Regent Street. That was the warehouse. That was the seamstress with pins between her teeth and the tea you didn't touch and the manual that counted the weeks for your aunt's cousin. You wore the crepe. You replaced it when it turned rusty. You sat in the hushed room while someone altered the hem and pretended not to notice you crying. You handed over a lock of his hair and chose forget-me-nots because the willow was, frankly, a lot. Behind all of it, behind the counter at Jay's and the 65,000 yards of crepe per week, were the women who sewed it, the dye workers whose hands stayed dark, the carvers at Whitby breathing fossilized wood dust, and the unnamed seamstress who handed you a handkerchief from her apron pocket and did not charge you for that part. Take a moment to feel quietly grateful for your washing machine, your synthetic dyes, and the fact that nobody is counting the weeks since your last known loss. Let your shoulders drop. Let the room go dark and quiet around you. Let the crepe and the bonnet and the small jet brooch carved into an urn slip out of your hands and into the cedar trunk at the foot of the bed. Sleep well.